Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to State of State, a Penn State football show presented by FanDuel. Play your game. I'm Tom Hannifan. Today, I am joined by Brad Kulp of Big Ten Beyond and Basic Blues Nation. For those of you that don't know, there's a tremendous article. The link is in the description of this podcast that Brad Kulp recently released, and there's been a lot of reaction to it. It's basically looking at what really happened to the Penn State football program in 2025. And I understand for the Penn State football fan base, there's a degree of fatigue continuing to rehash things with James Franklin, 2025, a season that had so much promise and absolutely went under. But I personally find this whole circumstance to be fascinating because the people within the program now have to fix everything that went down last year. So for us on the outside looking in, I think there is a great amount of curiosity as to how those problems are going to get fixed. So Brad, before we get into some of the meat of your article, and again, I want to encourage people to check out the Substack article, free to read. The link is in the description of this podcast. What inspired you to dig into this? And what is your response to people that have been critical of this on social media, saying that this is AI generated or that it's opinion and speculation as opposed to information from credible sources?
Right. Well, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Right. Happy Friday. It came across almost, it was very natural how it came across. Right. From time to time, I talk with some players, some folks on the staff here and there. And it was a player that I was speaking to that just said, you know what, I have some things that I want to get out. Right. There's some things that have bothered me. That I've been honestly, upset about, angry about how things went down for myself and folks surrounding the program. And I said, okay, let's talk about that. And we started discussing a little bit. I said, is this something that, you want to put out there? And they said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, okay, well, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. You only get so much time with these with folks when you're interviewing, right? You have to be respectful of them and your questions and your type of questions. And then, we started that process. And then as far as fan reaction, totally understood. I honestly believe there would be a lot more negative reaction than there was. There was an initial, it was very, very quick initial negative reactions. Like, okay, I get it. People are just, responding emotionally. It happens. There's some valid reactions in there, some good questions, which some of them I would address. Most of them, you don't respond to, you don't feel into it. Going from there, overwhelmingly the reactions were positive though. A lot of people, it was like, oh, these are things we already knew. These are rumors and things that we've heard for months. You're absolutely right. They were rumors. This is the first time we had anything factually come out of this situation since it all happened, since it all went down. And there's a lot of people saying, hey, some of it, I may not really kind of get or grasp or agree with, but I appreciate the effort, right? Appreciate you, doing this and trying to go out and get answers. And that's all it was. That's all it was. Somebody sent a message and said, what are you hoping to get out of this? What is your end goal? And honestly, until in that question, I saw it come yesterday on X, until that question hit, I hadn't thought about it. It wasn't like I'm going to do this for this reason. It was somebody wanted to get the truth out. They wanted to speak about what happened. And I wanted to give them that voice and that platform and let the chips fall, and whatever happens, happens. There it is. A lot of people have been wondering what happened, and hopefully this gives them some insight.
I think to a degree, there are Penn State fans who are feeling consumer fatigue, especially after 12 years of James Franklin and so many years of the NIL era where there were pleas for donations, those sorts of things. We can get to a national championship, all that sort of stuff. So I think to a degree, if you're an investor in any sort of business and you don't see ROI, you might be a little frustrated by that. So I think that's kind of where some of this comes from. Before we really get into this, because I do want to walk through a lot of the questions that you asked, can you detail how many sources that you were able to get? Are they existing or past members of the Penn State football program? And are any of them past or existing players on the team?
Yeah, so I had two sources, right? I had one initial source that I've been speaking with, going through the interview and the questions. I then had a second source just recently, last weekend, reach out and say, hey, I saw your announcement, kind of what you're working on Sunday evening. I have some more information. If you would like some more information, would like to corroborate some things, right? And how can I help? So I had two sources: existing players, played last year, and are happy with everything. They're not disgruntled. They're not trying to, lash out. It was just they didn't like how things went and the narrative that was pushed, right? And these guys are both on the team this year. So that's about all I can say to that. I will say that over last year, even 2024 into 2025, I think I've gained a bit of trust just by being kind of like your friendly neighborhood Penn State guy on there, right? I try to keep it lighthearted and have fun. And, I punch back at trolls. I think that's where I'm a little different than a lot of media guys, and I always think, somebody has to stand up, right? And I make a lot of jokes, and I'll troll times of myself respectfully. And for that, I've had some of the staff that are at Penn State and that have moved on to other places reach out. Hey, how's it going? Like your stuff. I lurk a lot, things like that, and some of the players as well randomly reach out. And I've had people come out and say, just send me a message, man. I can't believe this happened, after a particular game or whatever. And that's always stuff I just kept in confidence between myself, the players, or the staff, so I've always had I don't want to say relationship, but had this situation where, some players and staff have reached out to me randomly just for casual conversation, and I've always kept that close to my heart, and kept that private and special. But this time talking, it was something that I felt that the truth needed to get out there. We haven't had any information, and it sounds dumb, I guess, to some people, it's a sport, but any closure on what happened. Like you said, after, 12 years of this, there was a fatigue, right? And there's reasons for that fatigue. And I felt like it was a good time to address that.
Well, and to the point you made before, if you're an existing player or a player that's somewhere else, staff member, you're trying to protect your job. That's just the truth of this world. And You're never going to get the truth from James Franklin, because he's always going to protect himself. And even past coaches that may have worked with him, you're probably not going to get the truth from them for a long time, because they'd like to maintain future employment. So you can understand the challenges that come with this. I want to start with this initial question that you put in here for your sources. And it was saying, what was your experience with the PSU NIL process, and do you believe it was handled fairly? And one of the quotes here is that time spent in the program often mattered more than performance. The poster child for this is the rumor that Liam Clifford allegedly made $500,000 this past season, and he only had 3 receptions, 2 carries, and 2 pass attempts with 0 completions. So production didn't match up with compensation, but there is that argument of loyalty and longevity within the program, especially in this era. Shouldn't that be rewarded? So what was your reaction to hearing about that, and what's your stance on that?
Mine's a little bit more simple view regarding the Liam Clifford rumor, right? We've heard some people say, oh, it's true. We don't know. We've heard the same thing, that Dom DeLuca, Penn State linebacker, was getting $500,000, right? And these guys, they're out there, they're doing their best. They're in a situation, they didn't make that situation, right? For me, as I mentioned, it's simpler. It's and I was pushing for Clifford when Sean Clifford left. Liam Clifford's going to be there. I'm like, Liam Clifford for the win, right? Every week I want to see him go up. And I was kind of a fun Liam Clifford fan. But, as time went on, if we're being really realistic, why is he on the field? Right? If we're looking at just objectively, you're a fantasy football fan and you're looking at you have a business to run and you're looking at performers, forget the 500 grand rumors and this, that, and the other. I'm looking at results, and I'm thinking and looking at our roster and the talent we have on the roster and the other people that want to play. And I'm going, why is this guy on the field in the first place? That's just my, and from the rumors that we've heard all year were, on different things, social media and all this stuff was, hey, Franklin favored, the seniors and people that were around more than actual talent. We heard that all over the place. Like, hey, if you were a junior or, you were a senior and you put your time in, it didn't really matter your performance. You were going to get paid more and you were going to start, because we've heard it recently build up over months. And now since this story came out is, loyal to a fault. That would actually be, a very good name for a piece, loyal to a fault, regarding James Franklin. He was so family friendly and loyalty oriented that it ended up, hurting him. Right. And that's where the players that I spoke to were frustrated, right? Because you're on Penn State, you're there, you're working hard, you're in practice, you're doing everything and more that's asked of you to try and get on the field, right? And the thing that I point back when people say, oh, well, this is just, there's nothing new, these are just players hurt, disgruntled players, which they aren't, complaining. Well, what about the 3 or 4 weeks in a row that Franklin sat at the table in the press conference saying, we're going to get the young guys in the game, we're going to play these guys? And it never happened, and then you go back to my piece where one of the players says, yeah, if you asked or raised the issue of, hey, coach, can I have more playing? I'm not getting enough playing time, or I'm working hard, I want to get more playing time. Whether inside the program you went to coach and said that, or people pressure outside the program, like, why aren't you playing these guys? It actually worked in reverse. It had the reverse effect where, I'm not going to play you. I'm not going to start you. So it's a very weird situation. Seems kind of an emotional thing where, like, this is what I'm going to do. And that's where all of that came from. So
I'm biased, having done this show with Justin King for a long time. And I think back to 2005 when Justin King and Derek Williams came in as true freshmen under Joe Paterno, who for decades was known to be a guy who played as upperclassmen and freshmen weren't allowed to speak or let alone play. And in that season, you saw this influx of talent. Granted, Penn State was losing and needed a reset. And I believe King and Williams provided some swag for the program. So it changed things a little bit. But they played, and it was best player plays. And I think that's been the approach for a long time in college football and organized sports, period. So to hear this kind of archaic perspective from James Franklin, one, I think there's a side of me that respects James Franklin appreciating loyalty and rewarding it. But there's that fine line between impact and production, as you outline in your article. And also, the one thing that was pointed out to me by a dear friend of mine who is also a Penn State graduate, lifelong Penn State fan, is that he reminded me that when James Franklin was hired 12 years ago, he said no one was expecting James Franklin to get this team to a national championship when he was hired. He was hired to rebuild the program, rebuild its image, stabilize things, right the ship, so to speak. I don't think anybody, when James Franklin was hired from Vanderbilt, expected or thought he would get Penn State to a national championship.
Right.
I'm very much of the mind that when James Franklin went to Pat Kraft, asked for another contract extension this past year, was denied, went over Pat Kraft's head to the board denied it, having related to Pat Kraft, and the administration as a whole basically saying, prove it. Yeah, I believe speculatively from the outside, as just an outside viewer, I think James Franklin started to press, and he didn't know how to win a national championship. So his response as a very detail-oriented human being was to squeeze and to press this roster to be perfect and getting away from that 1-0 mentality. And you talk about in your article that complacency set in. Some of the things that were not allowed in the past were all of a sudden allowed. Can you go into any more detail on that? Things that might have been allowed in the past and not allowed, or changes?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There was that story where, if you're going over your boss's head and your boss finds out about it, and the quote that I was told, and there's a lot of conversation took place around this, other things was, you want more money, go out this year and make the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
Go out this year and make the playoff, right? Like, hey, I made the playoff last year. We made it to the semis. You mean you did what you were getting paid to do? Because that's right. So go out and do it this year, and then we'll talk. Then the pressure was on. You got to make the playoffs. And by week 5, that was done. That was gone. The things that I was told, as far as what was happening is lack of discipline and things like that. The culture slipping. You had elder players, senior players, right, that have been there, showing up late to meetings, not attending meetings, showing up late to practice, partying the night before games, like things that would never be tolerated before at Penn State, especially at, Alabama or Indiana, things like that. You know what I mean? And it did 2 things. Obviously, it starts lowering the bar and watering down the structure of your team and your discipline. But then the younger guys, and this is what was relayed to me, the younger guys that are working hard and they want to see time on the field are watching this. And they're honestly watching these older guys F off, because they have it in with coach and they're, seniors and things like that. And they continue to get the start. And some, not all, some have lackluster performance while they're still on the bench, right? And they're not getting any experience. They can't get any film, even if they want to get out. I just want to play for Penn State. Well, hey, this isn't working out for me. Maybe I'll go look at another school in the offseason. They have nothing to present to another school to showcase, their ability. So it's just a really, really weird situation that started with the crumbling of the culture and the discipline.
State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today.
Again, I encourage people to check out the article that Brad wrote. The link is in the description of this podcast. Brad does a great job with Big Ten Beyond and Basic Blues Nation. Continuing to go through your article, which had a great response on X for anybody with eyes. It was roughly 250,000 people were able to view it. So clearly triggered a response, whether, as you said before, that be positive or negative. One of the questions you asked of your sources was, how much of the offensive struggles would you attribute to Franklin or Andy Kotelnicki, and why? And basically the response being a lot of it traces back to the top. And it's something Penn State fans have speculated about for years, in that the common denominator with the offensive struggles was always James Franklin. And you would constantly see this revolving door of offensive coordinators and the hype and the success that they maybe had elsewhere. And then they get to Penn State and all of a sudden it disappears. The only one that really seemed to have tremendous success was Joe Moorhead. Granted, Joe Moorhead had one of the best Penn State offenses ever assembled, right, and a generational talent in Saquon Barkley. So I'm not saying Joe Moorhead wasn't a great offensive coordinator. I also understand Joe Moorhead had the courage to tell James Franklin to F off on a variety of bases. I don't know if others had that, because you could see the way that the offense, despite a change in signal caller, for instance, Andy Kotelnicki loved his gimmicks, his gadgets, that sort of stuff. It's like, right, cool, you can do that, but here are the guardrails that James Franklin is going to present for that offense. 12, 13 personnel, wide receivers that are small and don't really create a whole lot of separation. I personally never understood the concept of stockpiling freak tight ends to the depth of 6, for instance, when only guys like Tyler Warren are unicorns and true game changers, that sort of thing. So what did you learn about the struggles for offensive players under James Franklin?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. There's always been that common denominator. I mean, we've had so many offensive coordinators, right? And it's a miracle that Sean Clifford did what he did, because Sean Clifford played for 3 different offensive coordinators. A lot of people don't realize that, right? And there's been that common denominator. And I think that there's always been that bit of a me ego there when it comes to how the offense was going to function and who was going to play in regards to the leadership at Penn State. One of the things that I asked about, and I know it was very top of everyone's mind, and there was only so much information from these players on it, right? And I didn't, again, wanted to keep everything confidential, was what's been the deal the last few years with the wide receiver group? That's a big one. Like, how, we've seen all this, but how does that explain, what's happened? Because you're recruiting these guys, you're getting these guys, if you start from the beginning and you follow this thought process, that were highly recruited by a number of schools, right? They're wanted across the country. So it's not like we're getting leftovers. So you get these guys, they come in, you tout them really hard, 4 5-star receivers, things like that, or maybe not 5, but 4-star receivers. And Franklin has done well. Penn State has done well with developing guys, right? But not at the receiver position. And basically, it was told to me is you as a receiver, right? It was gathered. You come to Penn State, and you take 2024, for example, right? Tyler Warren's the top weapon. And the entire playbook is developed around running and Tyler Warren. And from time to time, they would go to a receiver. They would go here or there. And these guys would put the effort in. But if you're in the huddle and they call the play, you're like, I'm not getting the ball again. And they call the next one, I'm not getting the ball again. And you're basically a glorified blocker out there. And it's over and over again. You're losing your passion for it. Why are you putting in effort? Because there's times we've seen videos, we've seen clip. Landon Tingwell's talked about it, and other people, where you've seen wide receivers in the play basically strolling, walking through the play, not putting in effort. They knew they weren't getting the ball, and it's time and time again they get frustrated. So it doesn't explain everything, with that issue, right? But people say, oh well, they gave up. Well, that also goes back to the discipline. That goes back to the culture, right? It starts at the top. And something that I heard this year, we kind of know, something I heard this year watching Indiana and some other teams, and as the season went on, was your team is a reflection of your coach. And people say that, oh yeah, no. If you look at some of, these you look at Mario Cristobal, he's fired up, he's aggressive, blah, blah, blah. His team is like that. You look at Cignetti, he's like examining things. He's exact, he's precise. His team is like that, right? So whatever your personality is of your coach and whatever the vibe is of your coach, that's what your team's going to be like. And it sounds like it's an overarching generalization, but if you look back and you think back at how Franklin carried himself and some of the rumors we heard, and you see how the team carried themselves and watched it, it starts making sense.
Now the task is on Matt Campbell's desk, and Terry Smith being retained, I think, was critical for this program. And you had some insight in your article about what the players thought of Terry Smith and how he really improved things quickly, and he removed some things that he didn't agree with James Franklin. One thing that's been put out there by Drew Aller, the leaked audio, the meeting with Pat Kraft, of the ridiculous amount of practice time. And then you mentioned Indiana. Curt Cignetti has talked about less is more when it comes to putting these guys' bodies on the line during practice. And Drew Aller discussing being mentally exhausted by the time they got to games. And I think that comes back to James Franklin getting into the minutia and micromanagement of his team, not knowing what it took to get to a national championship in 2025, to the point that the Oregon game, for instance, I think as a fan and a lot of people on the outside, it was the belief that Penn State could win that game, but then also the feeling of Penn State has to win this game to prove that they can win the big one in the college football playoff. And when that didn't happen, you kind of could understand how if there was already complacency and a lack of discipline, that the team would feel that would permeate the roster, the staff. And all of a sudden it's like, well, if we couldn't do that, what's the point? And you could feel the lack of discipline and the lack of effort in the UCLA game and the Northwestern game. Terry Smith changed that. There was clearly passion, effort, toughness, and grit the remainder of the 2025 season and into the victory over Clemson in the Pinstripe Bowl. Can you add any other insight as to how Matt Campbell's been received, how he's been trying to repair Penn State's image, and what Terry Smith has ultimately meant in this transition?
Yeah, I mean, that's really good stuff. And I've been a leader and a coach in corporate America for a number of years. So I love this stuff. I eat it up, the whole good to great model and the book and everything. And to me, something I came up with a couple years ago, and you watch how there's toxic environments, whether it's on a team or, in a corporate environment, anything like that. And one of the phrases I came up with is just nobody wants an a-hole for a boss, right? Your job is difficult enough as it is. You get up every day, you have your duties, your tasks that you have to perform, your expectations, right? Why do we hire these people? Why do we bring these players on board, right? You have a salesperson, you hire that person to sell, right? And that job's difficult enough to go out and do that grind every single day and be successful and stay motivated. And it's the same with players. It's the same with, a construction worker. Why do we have them on board, right? Stay out of their way. Make the job as positive and as fun as possible. And I think in anything, when you start, and people say, oh, is your job fun? Maybe that's overrated. That's right. Some people, you just go to work. You do the job, you go to work. But if your employees are happy, if your players are happy, they're going to be a lot more productive. They're going to go a lot further for you. They're going to remember those small things and put in that extra effort and that extra mile. And talking with the players and what we've heard and what we saw with our own eyes on TV and in the media was the fun came back. The fun came back to being a player at Penn State, right? And they were given a little bit of their time back to just go out and perform, use their talent and be themselves. And we saw the pressure come off. We saw the energy come up, right? And we saw the effort come up, and they finished very strong. They, again, hang the banner, but they almost beat Indiana, right? That was a phenomenal game. I was at the Nebraska game. It was cold. I have a Nebraska buddy that had never been to Happy Valley, so it was a makeshift whiteout, and it was great. The fans treated him great, and I thought that was one of the best games Penn State played than Nebraska at home, and later in the season. And the fun just started coming back, and the pressure was taken off, and we saw what happened. And Terry was instrumental in that. Terry was the bridge. Terry understood that from the get-go, right? Obviously, we saw it immediately, the change in the team and the positivity we saw in some of his locker room, speeches and things that he said, and that's what this team needed. It seems looking at it now in hindsight, where if you juxtapose, you had Terry Smith coming and being that motivating leader, we're going to get this done. Where's your pencil, right? What you can write your story compared to pounding the game plan and pounding preparation over and over again, right? And the pressure was just so much that it took the fun out of the game.
And it seems like, again, from the outside looking in, that Matt Campbell, new head coach, is doing everything possible to repair that culture and bring the culture that he was able to build at Iowa State, which by all accounts was a positive one, and trying to inject that into this locker room, but at the same time maintain Penn State's core values and get back to a place where Matt Campbell is selling Penn State as opposed to Matt Campbell. And I can understand a lot of people saying, hey, James Franklin was selling himself. Granted, longtime head coaches at any school, after a while, yes, you are selling yourself. You're looking for players to take a discount to come coach for you. How many years did Nick Saban do that? I'm not comparing Nick Saban to James Franklin for the
Right.
but I think there was a reset that had to happen, and it was just time. It was just time.
Right.
Brad, I want to thank you so much for this. I understand there are people who read your article. Maybe they didn't even read it and they just saw a headline and reacted to it and cast a lot of aspersions out there. Some people loved it. Some people hated it. And I wanted to give you this platform to give your side and explain the story a little bit more. For those of you that are interested, you can read his article about what really happened to Penn State football in 2025 for free via Substack. The link to the article is in the description of this podcast. Brad, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate you.
Thank you for joining us here on State of State, a Penn State football show presented by FanDuel.
Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel for just 99 cents a month. You can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by FanDuel.